Hey everyone, thanks for being here. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what you think about this case. Now, let's get into it. I work as a post-death realtor. When people die, they get relocated to one of three realms based on compatibility. Heaven has the best properties. Purgatory forces you to live with your pain forever. Hell has no properties at all, just endless wandering. The system worked perfectly until one case broke every rule. A woman who lived right, protected by an angel, until desperation forced her into crime. Now she doesn't fit anywhere. And when I found the only solution, I discovered someone was already there. Someone who shouldn't exist anymore. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. Death isn't the end. It's a relocation. When your heart stops and your brain goes dark, you don't face some cosmic judge who weighs your sins. You don't get sorted by morality alone. What happens is simpler and far more unsettling. You get evaluated for housing compatibility. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I did for 63 years in a place most people will never see. I worked in processing, a vast office complex that exists in the space between heartbeats, in the electrical silence after your last neuron fires. The walls there aren't made of anything you'd recognize. They shift between marble and mist depending on how you look at them. The air smells like old libraries mixed with ozone, and the temperature never quite settles. Sometimes I'd be sweating through my shirt. Sometimes I'd see my breath. I evaluated lives. Every person who dies generates a file. Not a paper file, though that's how it manifests when I need to review it. The files appear on my desk in leather binders, warm to the touch, smelling faintly of whatever dominated that person's final year. Cigarette smoke, lavender soap, hospital disinfectant. The scent is always accurate. Inside each binder, a complete record. Not just actions, but intentions. Not just words, but the thoughts behind them. Every moment of kindness. Every flash of cruelty. Every compromise made in the gray space where right and wrong blur together. My job was to determine which realm each person could inhabit without dissolving. Let me explain the three realms as they actually function. Heaven isn't clouds and harps. It's residential stability. Think of the nicest apartment building you've ever seen. Clean hallways, soundproof walls, perfect climate control. The units there are designed for consciousness that achieved equilibrium in life. People who managed their desires, who hurt others minimally, who found something approaching peace. Not saints. Just stable people. The properties vary. Some get studio apartments. Modest, sufficient. Others get penthouses with views that would break your mind if you tried to paint them. The criterion isn't moral superiority. It's whether you can exist in that space without your consciousness fragmenting from guilt or unresolved trauma. I've sent thousands there. Good people mostly. A school teacher from Boston who spent 40 years helping kids learn to read. A firefighter from Denver who pulled 12 people from burning buildings and never bragged about it once. A grandmother from Mobile who raised 6 kids alone after her husband died and somehow stayed kind. They fit. Their files were straightforward. Purgatory is different. It's not punishment in the traditional sense. It's preservation of suffering. The properties there are huge. Mansions, estates, sprawling complexes. But they're empty, cold. The floors echo. You can wander for days without seeing another soul. People sent there are dealing with unresolved pain. Maybe they hurt someone and never made it right. Maybe they were hurt and never healed. The realm doesn't torture them. It just refuses to let them forget. If you died sick, you stay sick. If you died grieving, you keep grieving. Time doesn't heal anything in purgatory because time there doesn't move the same way. I've sent people there too. Fewer than heaven, but still thousands. A banker from Atlanta who embezzled millions but felt genuinely destroyed by what he'd done. A mother from Seattle who lost her daughter to an overdose and blamed herself every day until her own heart gave out. They needed space to exist with their pain. Purgatory gave them that. Then there's hell. People misunderstand hell completely. There's no fire, no demons with pitchforks, no torture chambers. No, hell is the absence of property. It's for people who, despite achievement or success or even goodness, cannot exist in a fixed space. Their consciousness is too restless, too fractured, too unable to settle. In life, they were always moving, always dissatisfied, always reaching for something just beyond them. In hell, they wander, forever. Not through flames, but through empty landscapes that shift and reform. Abandoned cities, endless highways, forests with no center. They walk and walk and walk, and there's never a door to open, never a place to rest. I've sent people there. Not many, but enough. A corporate executive from New York who built an empire but destroyed every relationship in the process. A drifter from Nevada who spent 60 years running from anything that felt like home. They couldn't have handled a fixed address. The walls would have suffocated them. For 40 years, the system worked. Every file I opened, I could categorize. Heaven, purgatory, or hell. The criteria were clear. The placements were appropriate. Until Claire Davison. Her file appeared on my desk on a Tuesday morning. If Tuesday means anything in a place without sun, the binder was heavier than usual. When I opened it, the smell hit me immediately. Vanilla extract and industrial bleach, sweet and sterile. I started reading. Claire Davison, born in Portland, Oregon, 37 years old when she died. Worked as a pediatric nurse for 14 years. Never married. Lived in a small apartment near the hospital. Her file was filled with moments of genuine compassion, staying late to comfort scared children, buying groceries for families who couldn't afford them, volunteering at shelters on weekends. For 35 years, her record was nearly spotless. Then the bottom fell out. Her mother, Helen Davison, 72, was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The prognosis was 3 months, maybe 6 with treatment. But the treatment was experimental, not covered by insurance, and cost more than Claire could earn in 5 years. I read through the medical bills, the desperate phone calls, the loan applications, all denied. Then I read what she did next. Claire worked at a hospital with access to the medication supply room. High-value pharmaceuticals kept under moderate security. She started small, stealing a few bottles of painkillers, selling them through a former patient's cousin who had connections. Then she escalated. Chemotherapy drugs, antivirals, anything with street value. She made enough to pay for her mother's treatment. Helen lived 9 additional months. She died on a Tuesday afternoon with her daughter holding her hand. Claire was caught 2 weeks later during a routine inventory audit. She confessed immediately, pled guilty, served 18 months in minimum security before getting released on parole. She died 3 years later, car accident on Interstate 5. Quick, painless. Her file closed with a note I'd never seen before. Protected by Guardian, designation A7749. She'd had an angel watching over her, the whole time. Angels don't get assigned to bad people. They're compatibility markers, indicators that someone lived in alignment with cosmic equilibrium. Claire should have been a straightforward heaven placement. But she'd committed crimes. Real crimes. Theft. Drug trafficking, technically. People had been hurt by what she did. Addicts who bought the stolen medications. Other patients whose treatments were delayed because of shortages she caused. I tried placing her in heaven. The file rejected it. Physically, the pages grew hot under my fingers, and text appeared in red. Incompatible, violation of property laws. I tried purgatory. Same response. Incompatible, suffering insufficient for preservation. I tried hell. The file actually smoked, burned my palm. The message was clear. Incompatible, consciousness too stable for wandering. I sat there for 3 hours staring at that file. In 63 years, I'd never seen a complete rejection. Every soul fit somewhere. That was the fundamental rule. But Claire didn't fit anywhere. I brought the case to my supervisor, a being named Elliot who'd been doing this work for 2 centuries. He appeared human most of the time. Gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of ageless face that could be 40 or 400. His office smelled like rain on concrete. "Let me see it," he said, holding out his hand. I passed him the file. He opened it, read for maybe 30 seconds, then closed it. This shouldn't exist, he said quietly. But it does. Yes. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief that materialized from nowhere. How long have you been working here? 63 years. Then you know the system is designed to accommodate every variation of human experience. Good people who did bad things, bad people who did good things, people who were neither. The three realms cover the spectrum. Except they don't cover Claire. He put his glasses back on. Have you tried a forced placement? What's that? You override the rejection. Place her anyway. The realm will adapt, or she will. Or she'll fragment. Yes. I looked at him. That's not acceptable. Then what do you suggest? I didn't have an answer. Not then. Elliot stood, walked to his window, which showed nothing but gray fog. There's a file, he said slowly. In the archives. Restricted section. Level 9. I don't have level 9 clearance. You do now. He passed me a key card that appeared in his hand. Black plastic. No markings. Look for reference code, WR001. Read it, then decide what to do with Claire Davison. What is it? An option we don't discuss. I took the key card. My hand was shaking. The archives existed 12 floors below processing. I'd never been past level 3. The elevator ride down took longer than it should have. The kind of descent that feels like falling even though you're standing still. Level 9 smelled different. Dust and copper. The lights flickered in patterns that hurt to watch. There was only one file cabinet. I used the key card. The drawer opened with a sound like breaking glass. Inside, a single binder. Red leather. The cover was warm, almost feverish. Reference code, WR01. I opened it. The first page had a title, The Waiting Room, Contingency Protocol for Incompatible Designations. I read for 2 hours. The waiting room wasn't supposed to exist in any permanent sense. It was created as a temporary holding space for souls that broke the classification system, people whose lives contained such extreme contradictions that no realm could accommodate them safely. The space itself was described as architecturally unstable, a property suspended between dimensions, accessible only through specific authorization codes. According to the file, it had been used exactly 7 times in the entire history of the afterlife processing system. The last recorded use was in 1959. I flipped to the appendix. There was a list of the 7 occupants. Names, dates of entry, dates of exit. 6 of them had exit dates, 1 didn't. Name, Vincent Harris. Entered, November 3rd, 1959. Exited, pending, 67 years. Someone had been in the waiting room for 67 years. I closed the file. My pulse was hammering, which shouldn't have been possible given that I was technically dead myself, but some habits persist. I went back to Elliot's office without knocking. There's someone still in there, I said. He didn't look up from his desk. I know. How is that possible? The protocol says temporary. The protocol says a lot of things. Who is Vincent Harris? Elliot finally met my eyes. A doctor. Philadelphia, 1950s. He developed a technique to extend terminal patients' lives beyond what was naturally possible. Saved hundreds of people. Also violated fundamental laws about when consciousness is supposed to separate from the body. He kept people alive who should have died. Caused immense suffering in some cases, immense relief in others. So he's, what, stuck? We couldn't decide where to put him. Every few years, someone reviews his case. Every few years, the answer is the same. Insufficient resolution. That's not temporary, that's imprisonment. Yes. I felt something crack inside my chest. Anger. Maybe. Or horror. I'm not sending Claire there. Then where? Elliot asked, and his voice was genuinely curious. She doesn't fit the system. Vincent didn't either. The waiting room is the only option for people who break every category. There has to be another way. If you find one, he said, Let me know. We've been looking for 70 years. I left his office, went back to my desk, stared at Claire's file for the rest of what passed for a day. Then I made a decision that would cost me everything. I was going to visit the waiting room myself. I was going to meet Vincent Harris, and I was going to figure out what the system wasn't telling me about the souls it couldn't categorize. The authorization code was in the WR001 file, a string of numbers and symbols that felt wrong to read aloud. I wrote them down on a piece of paper that immediately began to deteriorate in my pocket. There was a door in processing that nobody used. End of the east hallway, past the break room that smelled like burnt coffee and regret. The door was gray metal, unmarked, and it was always locked. I used the keycard. The lock clicked open with a sound like a bone breaking. Behind the door, stairs, going down. The walls were the color of old bruises. I descended. The temperature dropped with each step. By the time I reached the bottom, I could see my breath crystallizing in the air. There was another door, this one wooden. Old oak, maybe. Carved with symbols I didn't recognize. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. It turned. I stepped through. The waiting room wasn't a room. It was an apartment suspended in nothing. When I stepped through that wooden door, I expected some kind of liminal space. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, the bureaucratic emptiness of a DMV waiting area. What I found instead made my concept of architecture collapse. I was standing in a hallway. Hardwood floors, scuffed but clean. Cream-colored walls with framed photographs I couldn't quite focus on. The images seemed to shift when I looked directly at them. There was a coat rack near the entrance holding a single jacket, brown leather worn at the elbows. The air smelled like coffee and old books and something else. Something metallic, like the air before a thunderstorm. Natural light came from somewhere, though there were no windows I could see. The illumination had that quality of late afternoon sun filtering through curtains, golden and tired. Hello? My voice sounded strange here. Flatter, like the space was absorbing the sound. No response. I walked down the hallway. My footsteps creaked on the floorboards, a sound that felt impossibly real for a place that shouldn't exist. To my left, a kitchen. Small but complete. Dishes in the drying rack, a coffee maker with half a pot still warm. On the counter, a newspaper. I picked it up. The Philadelphia Inquirer, November 2nd, 1959. The headline read, "Local doctor mysteriously disappears after controversial treatment saves child." Below it, a photograph. A man in his early 40s, dark hair starting to gray at the temples, wearing a white coat and a tired smile. The caption, Dr. Vincent Harris, whose experimental technique has drawn both praise and criticism from the medical community. I set the newspaper down carefully. To my right, a living room, a couch that had seen better decades, upholstery faded to a color between green and gray, a coffee table with water rings permanently etched into the wood, bookshelves lining one wall, packed so tightly the spines bulged outward. I approached the shelves, medical textbooks from the 1950s, philosophy, theology, and newer books too, contemporary titles on ethics, quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, books that hadn't been published in 1959, someone had been reading, recently. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. A man stood in the hallway entrance, the same man from the newspaper photograph, but 67 years older. His hair was completely white now, cut short and neat. Deep lines framed his mouth and eyes. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hands were in his pockets. Vincent Harris. "I'm sorry," I said. "I used the access code. I'm from processing. I needed to... I know who you are." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "I know why you're here. You have a case that doesn't fit." "How did you..." "Because that's the only reason anyone comes here." He walked past me into the living room, sat down on the couch. The cushions exhaled dust. "What's the name?" "Claire Davison." He nodded slowly. "Tell me about her." I stayed standing. She was a nurse. Good person. Then her mother got sick. terminal. Claire stole medications from her hospital to pay for treatment, committed real crimes, hurt people, but she did it for the right reasons. And now she doesn't fit anywhere. No. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, please, I don't get visitors often. Actually, I don't get visitors ever. You're the first person I've seen in 43 years. I sat. The chair was surprisingly comfortable. 43 years? I asked. The last visitor was in 1982. Someone from administration. They asked me questions about my mental state. Took notes, then left. Said they'd be back soon to finalize my placement. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. That was 43 years ago. The weight of that statement settled over the room. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Don't be. I've made peace with it. He stood, walked to the kitchen. Coffee? It's real somehow. Everything here is real. That's the strangest part. Please. He poured 2 cups, brought them back. The coffee was hot, bitter, perfect. I couldn't remember the last time I'd tasted anything in processing. So, Vincent said, settling back into the couch. Claire Davison, you're thinking of sending her here. I don't know what else to do. Heaven rejected her. So did Purgatory and Hell. The system has nowhere to put her. The system is flawed. I looked at him. You've had 67 years to think about this. 67 years, 4 months, and 11 days, give or take. He sipped his coffee. You want to know what I've learned? Yes. The 3 realms were designed by beings who understood morality in absolute terms. Good, evil, unresolved. They built a system that could accommodate the vast majority of human experience. Maybe 99%. And the other 1%? We're the exceptions. The people who broke the rules in ways that don't fit the narrative. I extended lives beyond natural limits. Some of those people thanked me. Some of them cursed me for prolonging their suffering. Was I a healer or a torturer? Both. Neither. The system couldn't compute it. He set his cup down on the coffee table, right over one of the water rings. Claire sounds similar. She saved her mother by harming others. She was protected by an angel, but committed crimes that violated cosmic law. She's a walking contradiction. So what do we do? We? Vincent raised an eyebrow. You're including yourself in this? I can't send her here. Not after seeing... I gestured around the apartment. This isn't temporary. This is abandonment. Yes, it is. He stood, walked to the window. I hadn't noticed the window before. It showed nothing. Just gray fog, the same fog from Elliot's office. When I first arrived here, Vincent said, I was angry. I demanded meetings with supervisors, filed formal complaints, wrote appeals. For the first decade, I genuinely believed someone would come get me, that they'd figure out where I belonged. What changed? I started reading. Really reading. The books appeared on the shelves as I needed them. Philosophy texts about moral ambiguity, scientific papers about the nature of consciousness, religious treatises about grace and judgment. He turned to face me. I realized something. The system isn't designed to be cruel. It's designed to be consistent, and consistency requires categories. But human beings are not categorical creatures. We're messy, contradictory. We contain multitudes, as Whitman said. So the system is broken. The system is incomplete. He walked back to the couch. Heaven, purgatory, hell, they work for most people. But there will always be edge cases, people who don't fit. And instead of acknowledging that as a fundamental limitation, the system created this place, a storage unit for uncomfortable truths. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You said 6 other people were sent here before you. Yes. They all left. You're the only one still here. Vincent's expression shifted. Something passed across his face. Grief, maybe, or resignation. They didn't leave, he said quietly. The coffee cup almost slipped from my hand. What? The files say they exited. That's technically true. But exit doesn't mean relocated to one of the three realms. Then where? They dissolved. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. Consciousness can't exist in contradiction indefinitely. Not without support. Not without purpose. The first person sent here lasted 3 years. The second made it to 5. The longest before me was 11 years. They just stopped existing? Their consciousness fragmented, spread out, became part of the background radiation of the afterlife. It's not painful from what I understand, it's just cessation. I stood up abruptly. The room tilted. Then why are you still here? Why haven't you? Because I found a reason to persist. He walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a leather journal. Old, the cover cracked. I started documenting everything, every thought, every realization, every day that passed in this place. I made it my purpose to understand why we exist outside the system, to find patterns, to leave some kind of record. He handed me the journal. There are 47 volumes now, all on this shelf. I've been writing for 67 years. I opened the journal randomly. The handwriting was precise, dated entries filling every page. March 15th, 1973. Today I realized that guilt and love are not opposites. They can coexist in the same action. A doctor who prolongs life is motivated by both. This is why the system fails us. It assumes emotional purity. October 2nd, 1989. If I had dissolved by now, would anyone know? Would it matter? I think the answer is yes. Not because I'm special, but because every exception to a rule reveals something about the rule itself. January 8th, 2019. 60 years today. The coffee pot still fills itself every morning. The books still appear when I need them. Someone, somewhere, is maintaining this place, which means I'm not forgotten. Just postponed. I closed the journal carefully. You can't send Claire here, Vincent said. Not unless she has a reason to persist. Most people don't. They come here, sit with their contradiction, and eventually give up. What if? I paused, trying to formulate the thought. What if she wasn't alone? Vincent looked at me sharply. What do you mean? You've been here 67 years. You've documented everything. You understand this place better than anyone. What if Claire came here but she had you? Someone who could help her find a purpose? You're suggesting I become a permanent resident. You already are. He was quiet for a long time. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled me. You know what's funny? In all these years, I never considered that possibility. I've been waiting for the system to accept me. It never occurred to me that maybe I'm not supposed to leave. Maybe this is where I belong. Is that acceptable to you? Acceptable? No. But possible? Yes. He sat back down. If Claire comes here, I can help her. I can show her what I've learned. We can document her case too. Maybe between the two of us, we'll find a pattern administration can't ignore. Or you'll both dissolve eventually. Maybe, but at least we won't dissolve alone. I felt the weight of the decision settling over me. This wasn't a solution. It was a gamble. A desperate attempt to make abandonment feel like purpose. But it was the only option that didn't involve forcing Claire into a realm that would shred her consciousness. I need to talk to her first, I said. Vincent nodded. You can bring souls here for consultation before permanent placement. It's in the protocol, Section 9. How do you know that? He gestured to the bookshelf. I've read every protocol document that exists. They appear when I ask for them. This place gives me what I need to understand it. I stood. I'll come back. With Claire, let her see this place, let her decide. Fair enough. Vincent walked me to the door. One more thing. Yes? When you bring her, be honest. Don't sell this as salvation. It's not, it's survival. There's a difference. I nodded. He opened the door. The stairwell was there, cold and waiting. Thank you, I said. For what? For still being here, for not giving up. He smiled, genuinely this time. I'm a doctor. We're trained to keep fighting even when the prognosis is bad. Old habits. I climbed the stairs back to processing. The temperature rose with each step. By the time I reached the gray metal door, I was sweating again. Back in my office, Claire's file was still on my desk, still warm, still waiting. I opened it to a blank page in the back and wrote a single line. Consultation scheduled, the waiting room. The file accepted it. The pages cooled under my hands. Now I had to figure out how to tell a dead woman that her afterlife options were limited to permanent exile with a stranger in an apartment outside reality. I went back to Elliot. His office door was open. He was standing at his window, hands behind his back. "You went there," he said without turning around. "Yes. And?" "Vincent Harris is still there because he chose to be. Because he found purpose in documenting what the system can't explain." Elliot turned. His expression was unreadable. "And you think Claire Davison will do the same?" "I think she deserves the option. I want to bring her there. Let her see it. Let her talk to Vincent. Then she decides." "That's highly irregular." "So is keeping someone in limbo for 67 years. Elliot's jaw tightened. "Careful. I've been careful for 63 years. It hasn't helped anyone." We stared at each other. The fog outside his window seemed to darken. Finally, Elliot sighed. "Fine. Bring her for consultation. But if she rejects the waiting room, you're out of options. We'll have to do a forced placement." "No." "Excuse me?" "If she rejects the waiting room, I'll find another solution." "There is no other solution." "Then I'll create one." Elliot's eyes widened slightly. "You're talking about violating fundamental protocols. I'm talking about doing my job, which is finding appropriate housing for souls. If the housing doesn't exist, I'll build it. You can't. Watch me." I left his office before he could respond. My hands were shaking. I'd just threatened to restructure the afterlife. I had no idea how to actually do that. But I knew I couldn't send Claire to wander hell. Couldn't force her into heaven where she'd fragment from guilt. Couldn't trap her in purgatory where she'd suffer eternally. And I couldn't abandon her in the waiting room unless she chose it. Back at my desk, I did something I'd never done before. I opened a file before the soul was ready. I reached into the space between life and death and pulled Claire Davison forward early. Souls usually arrive in processing disoriented, confused. They appear sitting in the chair across from my desk, looking around at the impossible architecture, trying to understand what happened. Claire appeared exactly like that. She was younger than her death age, 37, but she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with years. Brown hair pulled into a ponytail. Scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID badge. She had kind eyes. Exhausted, but kind. "Where am I?" she asked. "Processing," I said gently. "You died. Car accident. It was quick." She absorbed this. Looked down at her hands. "I don't remember pain. There wasn't any." "Am I?" She hesitated. "Am I in trouble for what I did?" "That's complicated. Can I explain something?" She nodded. I spent the next hour telling her everything. The 3 realms. The classification system. Her file. The rejections. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So I don't fit anywhere," she finally said. "Not in the traditional sense." "What happens to people who don't fit?" "There's a place. It's called the waiting room. I've just come from there. Someone lives there now, Vincent Harris. He's been there since 1959. Her eyes widened. "That's 67 years. Yes? And you want to send me there? I want to show it to you. Let you meet Vincent. Let you understand what it is. Then you decide." "What if I say no?" I met her eyes. "Then I find another way. I promise you that." She studied my face. "You're not supposed to make promises like that, are you?" "No." "Why are you?" "Because you remind me why I took this job," I thought. "Because your file smells like vanilla and bleach and compassion. Because the system failed you and I refuse to accept that as inevitable. Because it's the right thing to do," I said aloud. Claire stood. "Okay. Show me this waiting room." I stood too. Follow me. We walked through processing together, past the endless rows of desks where other evaluators worked, down the east hallway, to the gray metal door. I used the key card. We descended the stairs. At the bottom, I knocked on the wooden door. Vincent opened it. He looked at Claire. She looked at him. "Hello," he said. "I'm Vincent. Welcome to the place the system forgot." Claire stepped inside. I followed. And in that apartment suspended in nothing, 3 impossible souls stood together trying to figure out how to exist outside the categories that were supposed to define us. Claire walked through the waiting room like someone touring a house they couldn't afford. Slow steps, careful observation. She ran her fingers along the kitchen counter, examined the photographs in the hallway that refused to stay still, stood in front of the bookshelf for a full minute without speaking. I watched her touch the spine of a medical journal from 1962, saw her face when she recognized the author's name, a colleague of hers who died 30 years before she was born. Vincent and I gave her space. We sat in the living room while she explored. The silence between us was comfortable in a way that surprised me. Through the impossible window, the fog shifted in patterns that almost looked intentional. Finally, Claire came back and sat in the chair I'd occupied earlier. She smoothed her scrubs, a nervous gesture I recognized from countless intake interviews. She looked at Vincent with eyes that had seen too much suffering to pretend otherwise. "How do you stay sane here?" she asked. Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Who says I am? I'm serious. So am I." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, the posture of a doctor delivering difficult news. Sanity is contextual. In a place that defies normal reality, normal definitions of sanity don't apply. I stay functional. I stay aware. I stay capable of reflection and growth. Is that sanity? Maybe. Maybe not. Claire absorbed this, her nurse's training evident in how she processed information, taking it in, categorizing it, looking for patterns. "What do you do all day?" "I write. I read. I think. Sometimes I cook even though I don't need to eat. The ritual matters more than the nourishment." He gestured toward the kitchen where a pot of something sat on the stove, steam rising. "Sometimes I just sit and listen to the silence. There's a rhythm to it once you stop fighting. The apartment breathes. Did you notice?" Claire's eyes widened slightly. "I thought I imagined that." "You didn't. The walls expand and contract. Barely perceptible, like lungs. I've measured it, 3 centimeters every 47 minutes. Perfectly consistent. That's disturbing. Or comforting, depending on your perspective. It means the place is alive in some sense. Maintained. Cared for. Don't you get lonely?" The question hung in the air. Vincent's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the philosophical distance he'd maintained. His hands unclasped, fingers spreading on his knees. "Every single day," he said quietly. "For 67 years, every single day." The rawness in his voice made me look away. This was private pain, earned through decades of isolation. Claire nodded slowly, and I saw moisture gather in her eyes. She understood that kind of loneliness, the isolation that comes from carrying impossible choices nobody else could comprehend. Her hands folded in her lap, fingers interlaced tightly. I noticed she was still wearing a ring on her right hand, simple silver band with an inscription too small to read from where I sat. Her mother's wedding ring, I realized. "If I come here, will I dissolve?" she asked me. "Like the others?" I'd been dreading this question. "I don't know. Vincent believes you need a reason to persist, something that makes staying worthwhile. And if I can't find one, then yes, eventually." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she looked back at Vincent. "Can I ask you something? Your reason to persist, the documentation you mentioned, is it enough? Really? Or are you just telling yourself that to survive another day?" The question was brutal in its honesty. Vincent didn't flinch. He stood, walked to the bookshelf with the careful movement of someone who'd walked that path thousands of times. His fingers found a journal without looking, muscle memory from years of repetition. He pulled it down, dust motes dancing in the strange afternoon light that had no source. November 19th, 2007, he read aloud, his voice taking on the cadence of a man reading his own autopsy report. Today I understood something fundamental. The system doesn't fail because it's cruel. It fails because it was designed by beings who never experienced contradiction. They're older than human morality, older than guilt and love existing in the same breath. They created categories that work for straightforward cases. But humans are not straightforward. We're paradoxes wrapped in flesh. And when the flesh is gone, the paradox remains. He closed the journal carefully, treating it like something precious and fragile, which it was. 67 years of consciousness preserved in bound paper. Is it enough? He continued, returning to the couch. Some days, yes. Some days I feel like I'm doing important work, documenting the limits of a cosmic system, proving that exceptions matter, that we matter. Other days? He paused, and I could see the weight of decades in his eyes. Other days I feel like I'm just delaying the inevitable, writing words nobody will read, in a place nobody visits, convinced that my suffering has meaning when maybe it's just suffering. Until now, Claire said softly, her voice carrying something like hope. Until now, Vincent agreed, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The kind that only comes from shared, impossible circumstances. Claire stood with the decisive movement of someone who'd made a choice. She walked to the window, pressed her palm against the glass. Her reflection was faint, translucent. I spent 18 months in prison. Minimum security, but still locked away. Metal doors, strip searches, the smell of industrial cleaner trying to mask things it couldn't erase. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the weight beneath it, the careful control of someone who'd learned not to break in front of others. I thought about my mother every day, whether saving her was worth what I did, whether the people hurt by my choices would ever forgive me, whether I could forgive myself. She paused, her breath fogging the glass. I never reached a conclusion. I loved my mother. Watching her die would have destroyed me, so I made choices that let me keep her for 9 more months. 9 months of breakfast conversations and holding hands and saying things we'd left unsaid for too long. I'd do it again. Her voice cracked slightly. But I also carry every person who suffered because of the drugs I stole. Every treatment delayed because supplies ran short. Every addict who got their hands on medication because I created a pipeline. I carry all of it. Every single face. She turned to face us, and her eyes were dry but fierce. So no, I don't fit heaven. I understand that now, but I don't think I fit here either. Not long term. I don't have Vincent's discipline. I'm not a scholar. I can't spend decades writing journals and finding meaning in philosophical frameworks. I'm just a nurse who made impossible choices and couldn't live with either option. Then what do you want? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. I want the system to change. The words landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spread through the room, actual physical ripples. The walls pulsed once hard. The coffee in Vincent's mug sloshed. Vincent's eyebrows rose. I felt something electric run down my spine. The apartment was reacting to her declaration. Explain, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire walked back to the chair, sat down with her spine straight. She'd shifted from vulnerable to determined, and I recognized that transformation. I'd seen it in people who'd decided to fight instead of surrender. You said the system was designed by beings who don't understand human contradiction, she began. But they must have known people like me and Vincent would exist eventually. They created the waiting room as a contingency, which means they acknowledge the system is incomplete. Acknowledging a problem isn't the same as fixing it, Vincent said carefully. No, but it's a starting point. Claire looked directly at me. You said if I rejected this place, you'd find another solution. Did you mean that? Yes. Even if it means violating protocols? I thought about Eliot's warning, about 63 years of following rules that suddenly felt inadequate, about all the souls I'd forced into incompatible realms because the system demanded a placement, any placement. Yes, I said again, and meant it completely. Claire leaned forward, her eyes bright with an intensity I hadn't seen before. Then here's what I propose. I don't stay here permanently. Neither does Vincent. We use this place as a base, a foundation to build something new. Build what? Vincent asked, though I could see understanding dawning in his expression. A fourth realm. The apartment shuddered, not violently but deliberately, like it had been waiting for someone to say those words aloud. I stood abruptly. That's impossible. Why? Claire challenged, standing to face me. Heaven, purgatory, hell, they were all created at some point. By someone. Why can't a fourth realm exist for people who contain contradictions the original three can't handle? Because, I faltered, searching for logical objections. Because the infrastructure doesn't support it. The classification system is binary. Good, evil, unresolved. There's no category for people who are all three simultaneously, Vincent finished, his voice filled with something like wonder. He stood too, animated now. You're talking about institutionalizing the exception, making what we are into an official category instead of a filing error? Exactly. Claire's face was flushed with excitement. We're not broken. We're just different. And instead of trying to force ourselves into boxes that don't fit, we build a new box, one that accommodates complexity instead of punishing it. I paced to the kitchen and back, my mind racing. Even if it's theoretically possible, administration would never approve it. They've been maintaining this system for millennia. They're not going to restructure reality because one evaluator and two impossible souls asked nicely. Then we don't ask, Claire said simply. What? The waiting room exists right now, today. It has infrastructure. It's stable enough to sustain Vincent for 67 years. That means someone is already maintaining it, powering it, keeping it functional. She gestured around us. We expand it, turn it into something that can house more than one person, make it an actual realm instead of a storage unit. Vincent was nodding slowly, his scholarly mind clearly working through the logistics. The books appear when I need them. The coffee pot fills itself. The walls breathe. Someone, somewhere, is feeding energy into this place. There's already a support system in place. We're just talking about scaling it up. But accessing that system would require authorization I don't have, I protested, and knowledge I don't possess. I'm an evaluator, not an architect. I place souls. I don't build realms. You have access to the files, though, Claire pointed out. The protocols, the history. If 6 people were sent here before Vincent, there must be documentation about how the space was initially created, how it functions, how it's maintained. She was right. Of course she was right. I thought about the WR001 file, about the appendices I'd only skimmed, about the authorization codes that had gotten me here in the first place. There had been technical specifications, dimensional calculations, energy signatures. Even if I found that information, I said slowly, thinking out loud now, even if I figured out how to expand this place, what then? We'd still be operating outside official channels. The moment administration noticed, they'd shut it down. Would they? Vincent walked to me, his expression intent. Think about it. They've left me here for 67 years. They know this place exists. They created it. They haven't shut it down. Why? Understanding crashed over me like cold water. Because shutting it down would mean confronting the fact that their system is incomplete, that there are souls they can't categorize. Exactly, Vincent said. It's easier to forget I'm here than to admit I shouldn't exist according to their rules. So we expand in that same shadow, slowly, carefully. We make this place functional for people like us, and by the time administration notices, if they notice, it's too established to dismantle without admitting the original system was flawed. Claire was smiling now, and it transformed her face. We're not asking for permission. We're creating a solution and daring them to destroy it, because destroying it means acknowledging they needed it in the first place. The audacity of it was staggering. The risk was enormous. If we failed, I'd lose my position. Worse, Claire and Vincent might face dissolution or forced placement in realms that would shred them. But if we succeeded, we'd create a home for every soul the system had failed, every person too complex for simple categorization, every contradiction that deserved existence instead of erasure. I looked at both of them. A nurse who'd committed crimes for love and a doctor who'd violated cosmic law to save lives. Two people who shouldn't exist according to the rules. Two people who refused to accept that impossibility. And I realized I was tired of enforcing rules that created suffering. "Okay," I said. "Okay," Vincent repeated as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Okay, we try." I felt something shift inside me. 63 years of compliance giving way to purpose. I go back to processing. I pull every file related to the waiting room. I find out how it was built, how it's maintained, what the limitations are. Then we figure out how to work within those limitations to create something permanent. "What about my placement?" Claire asked. "I can't stay in limbo while you research." "Actually, you can," I said, remembering protocol details. "Consultation periods. They're built into the system for complex cases. You can stay here temporarily while I evaluate options, up to 90 days before a permanent placement is required." "Then we have 90 days to make this work," Claire said, her voice firm. I nodded. 90 days to build a fourth realm. We shook hands, all three of us forming a circle in that impossible apartment. It felt absurdly formal and perfectly appropriate. We were making a pact that could reshape the afterlife itself. 90 days, Vincent echoed. And there was life in his voice I hadn't heard before. Purpose, after decades of waiting. I left the waiting room with my heart hammering, which shouldn't have been possible for someone technically dead. But some habits persist beyond mortality. The stakes were clear now. This wasn't just about Claire's placement anymore. It was about proving that the system could evolve, that exceptions deserved accommodation instead of abandonment. Back in processing, I went straight to the archives. Level 9. The smell of dust and copper, the flickering lights that hurt to watch. I spent the next 72 hours pulling files. My office became a fortress of documentation, protocols stacked on my desk, dimensional specifications spread across the floor, energy transfer regulations covering every available surface. The information was scattered, deliberately obscured in bureaucratic language. But it was there, buried in appendices and footnotes and technical addendums. The waiting room had been created by an entity named Architect Meridian, not a soul, but one of the original designers. In 1847, they'd encountered the first impossible case, a woman who'd been both healer and poisoner, saving lives in her village while ending others she deemed threats. Heaven rejected her kindness because of her violence. Hell rejected her violence because her intentions were protective. Purgatory couldn't hold her because she felt no remorse for the death she'd caused. Meridian had constructed a temporary space using excess energy from the borders between realms. The borders themselves, the transitional zones where heaven met purgatory, where purgatory met hell, generated surplus power from the friction of different dimensional frequencies. That power was usually dissipated, wasted. Meridian had captured it, channeled it, used it to build the waiting room. The process was complex but not impossible to replicate. It required authorization codes, specific energy signatures, and knowledge of interdimensional geometry. All things I could access if I was willing to bend enough rules. I was willing. I worked in secret, copying files to my personal storage. I memorized construction protocols. I learned the mathematical language of spatial folding, the physics of dimensional anchoring, the engineering of consciousness-compatible architecture. At night, or whatever passed for night in processing, I visited the waiting room, the wooden door, the descending stairs, the apartment that breathed. Claire and Vincent were adapting to cohabitation with surprising grace. She'd taken over one of the bedrooms I hadn't noticed during my first visit. They cooked together, the kitchen filling with smells that shouldn't exist in a place outside normal reality. They shared coffee in the mornings at a small table by the window showing fog and stars. Most evenings they read Vincent's journals together, discussing his observations, debating philosophical points, building on decades of solitary thought with fresh perspective. "We're working on a framework," Claire explained during my 5th visit, showing me pages covered in neat handwriting, both their hands, their thoughts intermingling. A set of principles for what this new realm could be. Not punishment, not reward, not suffering, just existence with contradiction accepted instead of resolved. "A place for people who are neither damned nor saved," Vincent added, pointing to a diagram they'd drawn, circles overlapping, creating space in the middle that belonged to none of the original categories. Who exist in the gray space between moral absolutes, who made impossible choices and shouldn't be destroyed for refusing to regret them. They showed me their work. Pages and pages of careful thought. Criteria for who might belong in the 4th realm. How to maintain stability without forcing resolution. How to support consciousness that exists in permanent tension without fragmenting into dissolution. It was brilliant, compassionate, practical. "I have the construction protocols," I told them on day 27, spreading technical documents across their coffee table. "I can expand this space, add more rooms, make it capable of housing multiple souls permanently. But there's a problem." "What?" Claire asked, her brow furrowing. "Energy. Creating new space requires massive amounts of it. The original waiting room was small because that's all Meridian could manage with excess border energy they captured 70 years ago. To make something larger, a true realm capable of housing dozens or hundreds, we'd need an authorized power source. And accessing that without revealing what we're doing is impossible. Which you can't get without explaining why you need it," Vincent said, understanding the catch-22 immediately. "Right." We sat in silence. The coffee maker burbled in the kitchen, the sound absurdly domestic in our impossible planning session. Then Claire said, "What if we don't create new space? What if we convert existing space?" I looked at her. "Convert from what?" "The borders." She leaned forward, her nurse's practicality cutting through theoretical obstacles. "You said the waiting room was built from excess border energy. What if there's more? What if the space between realms is larger than necessary? We could reclaim some of it, turn border territory into functional realm." My mind raced through the implications. That might actually work. The borders are technically unclaimed space. They're maintained but not occupied. Conversion wouldn't require new energy creation, just reallocation of what's already being generated and dissipated. Vincent was already at the bookshelf, pulling down a text on interdimensional geography that hadn't been there yesterday. The apartment was helping us, I realized, providing resources as we needed them. He opened the book to a detailed map of the border zones. If we're careful, if we take small amounts from multiple border sections instead of depleting any single area, the 3 realms wouldn't even notice the reduction. It would be like skimming millimeters from the edges of 3 vast territories. It would take time, I warned, studying the calculations forming in my head. Months, maybe years, and I'd be working completely off record, if anyone discovered what I was doing before it was complete. "But it's possible?" Claire asked, her eyes bright with hope and determination. I met her gaze, thought about all the souls I'd placed in incompatible realms over 63 years, all the consciousness I'd watched fragment because the system demanded categorization over compassion. "It's possible," I said. Her smile was radiant. Vincent's hand found hers across the table. "Then we do it," she said simply. And so began the most elaborate unauthorized construction project in afterlife history. I spent the next 60 days executing a careful theft of dimensional energy. I identified 12 border sections with measurable surplus. I created siphon protocols that drew power slowly enough to avoid detection, fractions of a percent per day, amounts small enough to attribute to normal fluctuation. I rerouted that energy to the waiting room using channels that looked like standard system maintenance. To any casual observer, I was performing routine evaluations and filing reports. Nobody looked at the underlying code, the mathematical instructions that were quietly building something new. The apartment began to expand. At first the changes were subtle. A hallway that seemed longer than before. A closet that opened into a second bedroom. The kitchen growing a pantry that definitely hadn't existed the previous week. Then the expansion accelerated. A study appeared, lined with bookshelves that filled themselves with texts on philosophy, ethics, medicine, law, subjects relevant to the kinds of complex moral cases we'd be housing. A proper dining area materialized, table large enough for 12 people. The living room doubled in size, furniture arranging itself into conversation areas that felt welcoming rather than institutional. A library grew in what had been empty space, its shelves reaching toward a ceiling that kept rising. Reading nooks formed in corners. Windows appeared showing not fog but landscapes, forests, oceans, mountains, cities. Different views for different souls who might need different kinds of beauty. Claire and Vincent documented everything. They created a formal written proposal, a manifesto really, arguing for why the fourth realm should exist. They compiled examples from my files. With my permission, I provided them access to anonymized cases. Souls I'd struggled to place over decades. A firefighter who'd let someone burn because saving them would have killed 3 others. A judge who'd violated law to prevent injustice. A mother who'd protected her family through choices that haunted her. People who'd been forced into incompatible realms and suffered because the system couldn't accommodate moral complexity. The proposal was compelling, heartbreaking, irrefutable. On day 89, one day before Claire's consultation period would expire, and I'd be required to make a permanent placement, I completed the final energy transfer. The waiting room was no longer a room. It was a realm. I stood in what had become a grand entrance hall, staring at architecture that defied conventional physics. The space was now large enough to house 20 souls comfortably, with room to expand further if needed. It had stability. I could feel it in the way the walls held steady instead of breathing. Infrastructure that could sustain consciousness indefinitely. Purpose written into its very structure. It was beautiful. That night I made a decision that would end my career or transform it entirely. I brought Elliot to see what we'd built. He appeared at the wooden door looking skeptical and exhausted, his gray suit wrinkled in a way I'd never seen before. I'd told him only that I'd found a solution for Claire Davison and needed his approval before implementing it. "This better be good," he said, his tone suggesting he expected disappointment. I opened the door without a word. He stepped through into a space that was manifestly not what he'd been told existed here. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes widened behind wire-rimmed glasses. The entrance hall stretched before us, polished floors reflecting light from sources that cast no shadows. Doors lined both sides, each leading to private quarters designed for souls who needed solitude. At the far end, the common area we'd built, with its comfortable furniture and impossible windows showing stars wheeling in patterns that soothed rather than disturbed. Elliot stopped walking, stared, removed his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief that appeared from his pocket, his tell when he was processing something that challenged his understanding. "What have you done?" he whispered, and his voice carried genuine awe rather than accusation. "I built a fourth realm," I said simply, watching his face. "For souls who contain contradictions, who exist between categories, who need a place that doesn't demand resolution or punishment or reward. Just existence." Claire appeared from one of the rooms wearing clothes that weren't hospital scrubs, jeans and a sweater that the realm had provided somehow. Vincent emerged from the library, book in hand, looking more alive than I'd ever seen him. They stood together, waiting, not afraid, ready to defend what we'd created. Elliot looked at me, his expression unreadable. "This is unauthorized, completely against every protocol we have. You used restricted access codes, diverted energy without permission, created infrastructure outside administrative oversight." "Yes," I said, not bothering to deny any of it. "You've violated 17 different regulations, probably more that I haven't thought of yet." "Yes." You've committed what amounts to theft of dimensional resources. I've solved a problem your system created, I said, and my voice was steady. You've been storing souls in limbo for decades because you didn't know what else to do with them. Because the three realms couldn't accommodate human complexity, I gave them a home. I gave us a home. Elliot walked through the space slowly, examining the architecture with the eye of someone who understood what he was seeing. He tested the stability of the walls, looked out the windows at the impossible stars, entered one of the private rooms and stood there for a long moment before emerging. Finally, he turned back to face us. His expression had shifted from shock to something I couldn't quite read. "How many souls can this place house?" he asked. 20 comfortably. 30 in a crisis situation. With more energy allocation, we could expand further. And you've created criteria for placement? Claire and Vincent developed a comprehensive framework. It's documented. Every principle, every guideline, every consideration for determining compatibility with this realm. He held out his hand. "Show me." We spent 3 hours going through the proposal. Elliot read every page with the careful attention of someone whose decision would have permanent consequences. He asked pointed questions, challenged assumptions, demanded clarification on technical details, but he listened. Really listened. When he finished, he set the papers down on the table in the common area. The windows behind him showed a sunrise that would never actually occur. This realm existed outside normal time. "This is good work," he said quietly. "Thorough, well-reasoned, better than anything administration has produced for edge cases in the entire history of the system." "Does that mean?" Claire started hopefully. "It means I'm not shutting it down." Elliot looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. Or relief. "But you understand what this means for you? You've committed career-ending violations. Even if I support this, even if I make it official, you can't continue as an evaluator, and not after this." I'd known this was coming, had accepted it the moment I'd decided to proceed. "I understand." "So what happens to him?" Vincent asked, stepping forward protectively. Elliot actually smiled. "He becomes the administrator of the fourth realm. Someone has to run it, manage intake, maintain infrastructure, ensure the energy allocation remains stable. Might as well be the person who built it." The words took a moment to penetrate. "You're promoting me?" "I'm reassigning you to prevent a bureaucratic catastrophe." Elliot pulled out forms I'd never seen before, authorization papers printed on material that shimmered. "If anyone in administration asks, this realm was always planned. A long-term project approved decades ago and finally implemented. You were selected to oversee its development. The unauthorized aspects? Innovative problem-solving within broad guidelines. He was covering for us, for all of us." "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You could report this, have me dissolved, shut the whole thing down." "Because," Elliot said, signing the documents with swift, precise movements, "I've spent 2 centuries watching the system fail people like Claire and Vincent, forcing them into realms that destroy them, storing them in places like this and hoping they'd dissolve quietly so we wouldn't have to confront our limitations." He looked up, and his eyes were tired, ancient. "I'm tired of failing people. If you found a way to stop failing them, I'm not going to destroy it out of bureaucratic loyalty." He finished the paperwork, handed me the completed forms. "Claire Davison, you're the first official resident of what should we call it?" The 3 of us looked at each other. We'd been so focused on building it that we hadn't named it. "The in-between," Claire said softly. "Because that's what we are. Not good or evil. Not saved or damned. Just in-between, existing in the complexity." Elliot nodded. "The in-between, it's official. Vincent Harris, your status changes from temporary holding to permanent resident with full housing rights. You'll both assist with developing intake criteria and help with future placements." He turned to me. "And you're now the administrator of the in-between. Congratulations on your completely authorized new position." Then he left, walking back through the door that led to processing. The wooden door closed behind him with a sound like a book shutting. We stood in silence for a long moment. "Did that actually just happen?" Claire asked, her voice small with disbelief. "I think so," I said, staring at the authorization forms in my hands. Official documents making our rebellion legitimate. Vincent started laughing, a sound of pure relief and joy. We did it. We actually did it. We had. Against all logic, against protocol, against the weight of millennia of precedent, we'd created a place for people who didn't fit anywhere else. And the system had accepted it rather than admit its own limitations. In the months that followed, souls began arriving. 12 more cases in the first year, each one carrying contradictions too complex for the original 3 realms. A soldier who'd taken lives to save others and couldn't reconcile the gratitude with the guilt. A scientist who'd made a discovery that helped millions but destroyed the environment in the process. A teacher who'd protected students by methods that violated every rule she'd taught them to follow. Each one found a home in the in-between. I ran the realm with Claire and Vincent's help. We developed fair intake processes based on the framework they'd created. We built support systems for souls learning to exist with permanent contradiction. We created a community of people who understood that goodness and harm weren't always separable, that love could motivate terrible choices, that the right action could still cause suffering. Years passed in the in-between, though time moved strangely there. Faster than heaven, slower than hell, different from Purgatory's frozen eternities. I never aged. Same as Vincent hadn't aged in all his decades of waiting. Time worked differently when consciousness existed outside the normal rules. But I changed anyway, grew in understanding, learned that systems aren't sacred just because they're old, that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around, that sometimes the greatest act of faith is creating space for doubt, for complexity, for the beautiful, terrible contradictions that make us human. Eventually, though eventually is a strange concept in a timeless place, I died my second death. The true death that comes to everyone eventually, even those already dead. The final dissolution that even the in-between couldn't prevent. And when I did, I faced my own evaluation. The evaluator who reviewed my case was young in the way I'd once been young, earnest, thorough, believing in the system's fundamental fairness. She read through my file with careful attention, noting my years of service, my unauthorized construction project, my violations and innovations. "This is complicated," she said finally, echoing words I'd spoken so many times myself. "Yes," I agreed. "You don't fit the standard categories. You followed rules for 63 years, then broke them to build something that shouldn't exist. You stole resources but created a home. You violated protocol but saved countless souls from suffering." "That's accurate." She looked up from the file, and I saw myself in her confusion. The struggle between what the rules demanded and what justice required. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "Lucky for you, there's a 4th option now." And that's how I ended up here, in the realm I built. Among the contradictions I chose to honor instead of resolve. I still work in a way. I help new arrivals understand this place. I listen to their stories, all the impossible choices, all the moral complexity, all the ways they tried to do right and failed and tried again anyway. I remind them that containing multitudes isn't a flaw, it's what makes us human. Claire is here. So is Vincent. So are hundreds of others now, the realm having grown far beyond that first desperate apartment. We expanded into territories I never imagined, built wings for different types of contradiction, created gardens where souls could walk and think and exist without judgment. Sometimes I think about the other 3 realms. Heaven with its clean apartments and untroubled residents. Purgatory with its empty mansions and eternal suffering. Hell with its endless wandering. I don't envy them their clarity. Because here in the space we created for impossible people, I learned something the original realms never understood. Sometimes the most honest place to exist is in the question, not the answer. Sometimes home isn't where you're accepted despite your contradictions. Sometimes home is where your contradictions are what make you welcome. And that's where I am now. That's where I'll stay. in the place we built for people who broke the rules in ways that mattered, in the in-between, where nobody has to fit, where we exist in all our complexity, where we're finally, impossibly home.